Hi, welcome to today's episode of Our Ventura TV. My name is George Alger, and today's guest expert is Zoe Murdock, who is an author here out of Ojai. Welcome, Zoe.
Thank you, George. Thank you.
So I want to show one of your books here. You've got more than one, but this one is titled Man in the Mirror, which is a novel. Just give us a little thumbnail sketch of what this is about.
Yes, if you notice, the subtitle is A Man Finding Himself as He Loses Himself to Alzheimer's. And this is a story about a man with Alzheimer's, but it follows him from the early days of it, when he's first forgetting words, and follows him through almost to the end. So it covers many years.
Good. Now, for those who don't know what Alzheimer's is, could you just give us a definition of that?
Yes, it's a form of dementia that starts with people forgetting where they put their keys, or forgetting their words, not being able to come up with words. But it goes over a long period of time, sometimes 10 years, and gradually they lose more and more of their memory and their capability to function, to find their way in the world. It seems to me, after publishing this book, that everyone knows somebody with Alzheimer's. There's so much of it as the population ages. Either they're a caretaker or they know someone who has Alzheimer's. It's a really big deal right now and very devastating.
So what inspired you to write this?
My father had Alzheimer's, and he died in the late 90s. And after he died, I really started thinking about what is that experience like for the person who's going through it. And I'm a writer, I'm a fiction writer, and I decided I wanted to explore that. I wanted to know for myself what that felt like, and I wanted to communicate that to a reader. And so I spent 7 years on this book, and 7 years living with this character and going back and forth, taking him forward, taking him back, creating a past for him, so that we could see what he was forgetting as time went on, and also see the reference points of what he was remembering. My father was in World War II in India, flying the hump from India into China with 100-octane gasoline barrels in the planes that were crashing in the jungle all the time. I just barely knew this about him. But so as I started to write the book, I said, okay, I've got to have a past for this person, and I like that story of my father's. So I gave that to my protagonist, and I researched it, and I learned a lot about my father at the same time and what he was doing in India. So my father is the inspiration, my wanting to understand what his experience was, and my desire to communicate that to a reader in a way that they could have empathy for that experience, because there are a lot of people with Alzheimer's, and if we can't empathize with them, if we're just sort of seeing this forgetful person who's doing nutty things, it's a very lonely place for that person.
So how do you convey a character in such a way that you can provide some empathy to the reader when it has to do with something like Alzheimer's?
Right. Well, as a writer, you have a couple of options. You can write in first person, and so you can have the person tell the story themselves from inside their point of view. But I felt like I needed a third person narrator, because I'm taking this person down into his Alzheimer's, and he's going to be forgetting things. So I needed a narrator to carry it, because otherwise it would just turn into babble. So I created a narrator essentially who is embedded in the mind of my protagonist, Aaron. And so whatever he experiences, the protagonist can convey, but the narrator also shows what the world is seeing, how they're seeing him, and we're inside the mind of the character. And so the reader is sort of on that line in between the two places, and then I take him and put him into these situations, dramatic situations. He's not just sitting around waiting for his Alzheimer's to develop. And he's not just, having caretakers trying to make him do things. He's got a daughter who takes care of him, but he wants his freedom more than anything. He's a character who wants his freedom. And so he's always traveling to the Red Rock Desert, where he has a little piece of property in southern Utah. The story takes place in Salt Lake City, and then he gets in his old truck and he goes down there, and he picks up hitchhikers along the way. One hitchhiker is a homeless vet, Vietnam vet, who's a real troublemaker, but they have a little journey together. And then another time he picks up a sort of new age hippie girl that's like spouting metaphysical stuff all the time. And he's got Alzheimer's, and he's like, whoa, what is this girl saying? But because they're both sort of living in the present moment, they get along really well. And so I put him through these adventures, not just sitting around waiting for his Alzheimer's to take over, you know. He's out there in the world, and I'm showing how people respond to him and how he responds. And I take the reader right down in the heart of that. I've talked to a number of people who have read the book, and it's almost a little scary for them, because I was able to do that, and I was able to do it by going back and forth, you know, going through the chapters and then saying, okay, I need to go back and put this in, and going back and going forward and going back and going forward 35 times maybe, trying to find this thread of his mind and convey it to a reader so they could feel it.
It almost, I mean, the first thing that occurs to me is you must know a lot about Alzheimer's.
I know quite a bit. I did quite a bit of research at first, and I listened to people who had Alzheimer's, and I looked at painters there was one painter who painted himself as he descended into Alzheimer's, and it shows the disintegration of his mind in the perception of himself. I listened to the recording of a man who had Alzheimer's. They put a tape recorder on him, and he started sounding like he was in a cage, you know. It just every day it would be circling around. There's the kitchen. There's the front door. You know, he would be naming things and starting to lose more and more as he went. And I read about all the stages of Alzheimer's, and I read caretakers, and I read all this stuff, and then I just put that away. So now I'm going to create my character, I'm going to create his past, I'm going to create situations, and I'm going to take that knowledge that I have and just live with it for 7 years. And in his mind, and see what it feels like. And I started, sometimes when I'd write, I couldn't find a word, and I said, oh yeah, that's what that is. That's when you can't find a word. Now what if you can't find a lot of words? How do you say what you're trying to say? You know, and then I would think about being lost. You know, if you don't know where you started from, how do you know where you're going to? How do you know where you are along the path? And so I would think about that concept of being lost, and I would live with it, and I would write it for him, and I'd play it out and live it by writing and creating his situation. And so it became a real education for me. And I don't know, there's a process of writing a novel is such an amazing experience. To explore the subject, to explore your character, to try to figure out where the reader's going to be at any given time, you know, the language that you're using, where is it taking them, and to feel it, and to make each sentence go just right so it pulls them forward and they don't get confused and go back and have to read it again. And the pacing and the rhythm and all that stuff. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah,
I love it.
I bet it's a beautiful story. Let me ask you this. From a practical perspective, since you have this knowledge that you've now attained, is there some advice that you could give to people who are interacting with others who have Alzheimer's that could help them have more empathy?
Well, you know, I sort of feel like this is a kind of textbook. Not because I have all the answers in here, but because what I say is, here's what you need to think about. You know, how do you listen to what someone's saying when they don't have all the words and figure out what they're really trying to say? And if you know them, you know, it's like a coded language. You should be able to take what they're saying and go back to their path. Their past. Usually they go back to when they were younger. And my father did. He went back to India in his mind, and he went back to growing up as a boy in the Depression, selling fruit out of a wagon with his father in Salt Lake City. So they go back, and it's almost like they go back to a time where they liked their life more, where they weren't layered over by all the expectation of everyone. And also, you have more connections in your brain to those memories because you've revisited them a lot since they've been there with you. And so those memories stay intact a lot longer. Because part of the problem is you can't get access to memories. And if the short-term memory is what goes first, and so that never even gets stored. But then the oldest memories just have more pathways. And so if these pathways are destroyed, you can get at it from another direction.
Good. All right.
So what I'm saying, I don't say exactly what Alzheimer's is like for everyone because everyone is different. But I'm opening the questions of and a way of how to look at someone and try to enter into their space so they're not so lonely. Because it's a very lonely place. If you can't talk and you can't explain yourself, I think eventually people like shut down and don't try because they always get it wrong, and people are always throwing questions at them and saying, "What's your name? What's your name? What day is it? You know, who's the president?" You know, all these questions. They don't know the answers to those questions. They need someone to come into their space in that present moment place and live with them and look around and see what they're saying and say, "Oh, look at that flower," or you know, "Wow, you've really got a nice garden," or entering their space, which is why I love the idea of India and that present moment idea that comes out of India and the religion there, because that's the place of Alzheimer's, the present moment.
So we're almost out of time, but if I could re-articulate what you might be saying in terms of some practical advice for dealing with someone with Alzheimer's, would it be appropriate to say that if you are not only with them, but just simply referencing things in the present environment, that would be beneficial?
Oh, yes.
Okay, got it.
Because that's where they're living, basically. And they have great joy in that moment.
Cool. Well, before we run out of time, I do want to ask you if there's a summating message that you have for our viewers, and if there's a website that people could go to for more information.
Yes, the website is www.hotpresspublishing.com/Zoe Murdock. Or I'm on Facebook in a pretty big way, so you can find me there. I have an author page and a personal page. I'd love to see anyone there. Also, come to Ojai. My husband and I, Doc, teach a writing workshop on Thursday nights, and we talk a lot about how to get the reader into that space of empathy.
Thank you very much, Zoe.
Thank you.
This is George Alger signing off for this segment of Our Ventura TV. Until I meet again.